As the year draws to a close, we read the FreeBSD Q3 status report, explore the good and bad syscalls, we list the good of GOG Games for OpenBSD, and show you what devmatch can do for you in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 226, SSL, also called as Santa's Syscall list, recorded on the 27th of December 2017, last episode for this year. I'm still your show host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And this is exactly the last episode that we're doing for this year, but don't worry, we'll be around next year as well, so don't try to miss us. We'll be in the headlines this week with the FreeBSD Q3 status report of 2017. So this is a little bit late, but still it's out, and we have a bunch of stuff to report on that.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why it was late is it's a bit thin. So everybody's been so busy, they haven't written up enough reports. So the deadline for the Q4 2017 report, everything people did between October and December, is due January 14th. So use your little bit of time off in the holidays and write up some status reports for us.
Yeah, totally, so that we have something to report here. Okay.
So it starts off, this quarter's FreeBSD development continues to provide excitement and promise for future developments. I myself have a soft spot for manual pages, so it is especially good to see that we have gained some documentation for how to write them, and especially that this will translate to more and improved man pages in the future. The FreeBSD core team entry is also of particular note with the introduction of the FCP process and the recognition of the first non-committer FreeBSD project member and more. Read on to find out more about these, as well as improved support for the AMD Zen family of processors like Ryzen, and a whole lot more.
Yep, this is a good introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And so it starts off with the FreeBSD team reports. So they have individual reports from release engineering, the ports collection, the core team, of course, and the FreeBSD Foundation.
Yep. And it covers here that the release engineering team finalized the 11.1 release, which with the final build starting July 21st and officially released July 26th. And they note that during that quarter, they started the release of 10.4, which entered code slush on July 28th, and the final release expected to start on September 29th. And that'll be the fifth and final release from the Stable 10 branch.
Yeah, so this is the last one, and people then have to either stay with this forever or switch to the newer higher up.
You can't stay with it forever. Support ends about a year after it comes out.
So, yeah, there's an upgrade coming eventually.
Yep. Then the ports team has an update here. The ports collection now features 31,600 ports.
That's a lot.
Wow. I remember when it was like 18,000 and we thought that was a lot.
Yeah, this is super impressive. I mean, these things are from the smallest library to the biggest desktop environment you can think of. It's a lot of stuff.
Yep. There are currently 2,671 problem reports, of which 718 are not assigned to someone. This quarter saw almost 5,900 commits from 175 different committers. The number of open PRs has grown compared to last quarter and outpaced the number of changes. So it's obvious that there's lots of work here if people want to get involved. There are at least 718 problems that no one is currently looking at, and we'd like to see a bunch more people get in there.
Yeah, or to adopt an orphan port maybe that no one has taken care of in a while, but still worthwhile mentioning it or maintaining that. So definitely for people who are looking for work, this is an area they can do a lot of good.
And importantly, during the Q3 here, the ports team added Zach Leslie, Luca Pizzamiglio, Craig Larez, Adrian de Groot, and Dave Cuddlehuber as new committers. And they also took in 2 commit bits for people, Alonso after inactivity, Arpalo after his request, and sadly Ake when he passed away. And one person who was under mentorship decided to withdraw.
Okay, that happens. I mean,
Yep.
Sometimes it doesn't play out, but we're happy for everyone who helps in ports. So there's also stuff on the infrastructure side of ports. So they introduced 2 new uses variables, or they have actually removed because they outlived their usefulness. This is exec_info and twisted. So twisted because there's only one twisted port left, and libexec_info is now available as a base system component, and all the supported FreeBSD versions contain that now. So it's not required to have it in ports. The default versions of GCC were bumped from 5 to 6, so people are getting a newer version there. The newer Firefox is also available, version 56.0 currently, or at least at the time of this writing. There might be, Firefox is updated pretty frequently, and the
Right, we're
maintained
already a quarter past when this was written.
Yeah, so this is just a snapshot of the current events. And of course, the package version itself, so the tool for installing via packages, is at version 1.10.1, which might also be a little bit up by now. But certainly, it's a lot of stuff that happened in ports. So they have open tasks also. So as we said, the PR load needs more attention as the number of open PRs has started to increase again. So if people are looking for a pet project they want to spend a bit of time on, there's a bunch of information in the Porter's Handbook for people who want to get up to speed of how to do a port. It's actually quite easy, and I'm wondering why I haven't started that work yet myself. So yeah, on to the next report, which is the core team, which Alan and I should know about.
Yes. The FreeBSD community process, which was drafted during BSDCan earlier this year. The first such document, FCP number 0, defines how the whole process will work. After some time for discussion review, FCP 0 was voted on and accepted by the core team, following the procedure laid down within that document. Currently, the use of FCPs is entirely optional. We shall see how the community begins to adopt this usage and involves the process based on experience. I know I'm overdue on writing 2 or 3 of these, actually. Also, a draft update to the Code of Conduct has been prepared by the Advisory Committee. Core is currently reviewing the text and will soon vote on accepting it. That has since happened. Core is keen to avoid the traps of rule lawyering at the moment, and feeling that we need to add a preamble to the Code of Conduct to articulate the goals of the project and to act as general guide to the exercise of the code.
Yep.
But importantly, this quarter was also been quite busy when concerning the changes to the roster, committers, and project members. We've elected our first new project member, so that's someone who is a valuable part of the FreeBSD community, but doesn't necessarily have a commit bit, and that was John Hickson, who will be familiar to many people if you've been to many conferences or other places where John always is. There are also some other proposed project members that are being considered. And one of them, Fedor Uparov, we decided deserved a commit bit rather than just member status.
Yeah, so this is the next best thing, because most people have the status of a project member, but most people will move through these steps by going to mentee status and then become a full FreeBSD committer in any kind of fashion. So this is not something you would stay in forever. But if you like, there's still the project member status that you can have if you.
In addition to Fedor, we also added a number of other new committers, including Matt Joris, Marcin Wojatas, Chuck Tufli, Ilya Buklin, and Alex Richardson. We also awarded Stephen Hurd and Eugene Grossbane source bits to go with their existing ports bits. And we added Gordon Tetlow back as a source committer and as part of his new role as a security officer. Eric Davis and Rui Paulo have decided to hang up their commit bits, and we wish them well in the future. And again, sadly report the death of Andrei Chernov, who will be missed sorely by his colleagues and collaborators. But this also brought up another issue for core, highlighting the question of, how do we keep track of copyrights that have already had, it was already hard enough with the size of our source tree and the many different contributors, but as, we need to consider trying to keep track of heirs and beneficiaries of those contributors when they do pass on, so that we can deal with issues that might arise in the future. And so we're consulting with the FreeBSD Foundation's legal team to discuss approaches to try to alleviate this, including some kind of option to, bequeath your copyright on the code to the foundation so that it can be managed.
Yeah, so this is what we covered last episode. If you remember, what happens to the code if a developer passes away, or to the project actually, if you're the main contributor to that one. So this is something that most open source, or pretty much all of them, need to at least have a thought about.
Yes, there was also the complaint that the workings of core have been kept overly confidential, and that consequently the majority of the project has little idea what's going on. That's certainly not the intention of core, and we're keen to open up core's business to more general community scrutiny. So we publish our agenda ahead of the meeting so that it also invites the feedback and other information and data people might have to add to the discussion, so that we'll have it in time for the call, which is useful.
Or also stuff that's been added to the agenda, or stuff that's been resolved, actually is removed from the agenda, so people can see that there's actually work being done.
Well, yeah, so the things that get removed from the agenda go into the core report that goes out. But things that we've been working on for 2 years but are not finished yet, nobody really hears about until they are finished and go out in the report. And so trying to solve that.
These are mostly long-term issues that we can't fix from one meeting to the next. These are infrastructural things or long-term projects that sometimes have started in the last core and maybe carried on to the next core. But in the meantime, people are working on this and trying their best to resolve those, of course. We also had a bunch of licensing questions. So these are the typical paperwork kind of jobs that we try to keep away from developers, because it's kind of sometimes boring, but it's still necessary. So this is a licensing question. For example, when we were having a ports committer upstreaming patches and original works to the VirtualBox or other Oracle properties, the question already comes because they only accept the MIT license as submissions for patches. So the question is whether we can just stamp it with the MIT license and be done with that, or if there's some other way of fixing that. And this, of course, applies only to work upstreaming. So this is not from downstream consumers. And, of course, always with the permission of the original authors. We also figured out that the Viking software license is sufficiently BSD-like that magic constants there from the drivers can be used in FreeBSD code. So this is also something, if we encounter a license we haven't dealt with before, then it's takes some scrutiny to figure out whether this is compatible to the BSD license, so that we have no problem importing it into our tree. And of course, there's also a separate register of deviations from the allowed BSD-like licenses in the source tree. So any code in the tree under other than BSD licenses can be assumed to have been approved by core, because we check those licenses, or sometimes ask the FreeBSD Foundation's lawyer whether they see some problems with that. So that's the connection there that we have with core and the foundation sometimes. At the moment, the FreeBSD copyright requirement to include the copyright notice in redistributions in binary form is satisfied by making the FreeBSD sources with all the detailed copyright information included in the different source code files. So this is mostly for people integrating that into an appliance-style license or appliance-style package. So this is probably for companies and vendors the interesting point in this report.
Yep, a couple other quick updates. Amazon's proposing set up mirrors of FreeBSD update and of the package sets within AWS. The idea being that faster downloads for people using EC2. The mirrors will be publicly accessible, but the expectation is that they'll mostly be used by people already inside Amazon. Then the long deprecated insecure R commands like RSH and RLogin and RCP have been removed from the base system of FreeBSD 12, and notices about that were added to 11.1 and 10.4 releases so that people will get yelled at for using them. And if I can't imagine why, but if you do still need them, there's a port, net/bsdr commands.
Yeah.
The work to replace the Heimdall Kerberos in base with the more compatible MIT Kerberos has begun in the project branch, KRB5. This should not fall afoul of U.S. cryptographic export regulations, since we already notify the government that the cryptographic software is included in FreeBSD.
Yep. So this
Moving on, there's a short update from the FreeBSD Foundation. Do you want to go over the high points of that?
Sure. So, of course, we have some highlights in the last quarter, or this is still quarter 3, remember. Fundraising efforts is proceeding well, although if we look at the last few days that we have left in this year, we're still a bit short in donations. So if you still have a few things scrapped up in money, in the money department, then we'll be happy to receive those as donations if you want to support our work.
In particular, the number of individual donations is a bit small, and we'd like to see a larger number there. So, just $5 or $10 to get your name on the list makes a big difference.
Yeah. So sometimes people ask, what are you doing with the money? So some of these things are operating system improvements because we support paid staff to work on FreeBSD components like kernel subsystem. We add features and functionality, fix problems, and some of the work in there included project grants for work like ARM64 ports, the Blacklist D access control daemon, and the integration of the vimage support so that people have their jails with individual network stacks, and also making sure that FreeBSD remains a viable solution for research, education, computing, and products of various kind. So we have a bunch of projects kicked off already in continuing projects from the quarter 2. So these are the OpenZFS RAID Z expansion project that we are doing in collaboration with IX Systems. And who was the third? I keep forgetting.
Delphix.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. They're doing the actual work as Matt Ahrens is doing the coding for that. Broadcom Wi-Fi infrastructure improvements were also being done. So the BH and D driver is in FreeBSD Head, and people should check that out and test it with their devices. We also did headless mode out of the box for the BeagleBone Black so that people can use USB and make that work as a headless device. We also extended Beehive and the ARMv7 features, and we're working on this still. There's also some work being done for 2018, so there's cool stuff happening in this area. And we're also porting Beehive ARM to an ARMv8 platform. And of course, we did some bunch of work in project areas like ZFS improvements, new Intel server support, or virtual memory subsystem. So some people don't see these kind of changes in their day-to-day work, but these are kind of important for the actual infrastructure to make it better and more tightly knit together. We did StackGuard improvements. We also have toolchain projects that are still going on from last year and the year before. So this is a long-term project, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, so we're still working on this. We also have i915 driver support, and the NVDIMM support is being started with the collaboration that we have with Intel, and some other interesting stuff. We also have a paid release engineer, as many of you know, so this allowed us to have timely releases and also releases that are properly tested, and snapshots are being provided on a regular basis so people can test out the latest features without having to jump to current if they don't want. We're also supporting the FreeBSD infrastructure with hardware and like build machines for ports and test machines and other kind of hardware initiatives. We've been to a lot of conferences this year. So advocacy and education is also our biggest goal of the project and also the foundation. So we have a big list of not only just single events, but also BSD events, and a lot of advocacy has been done in various places. So I'll let you read the whole list because it's
this is just for Q3 of 2017.
Right, yeah. And
organized and ran the Essen FreeBSD Hackathon in Germany, sponsored and participated in the FreeBSD Developer Summit, BSD Cam in Cambridge, England, represented FreeBSD at the ARM Partner Meeting, presented and taught about FreeBSD at SDNOG in Khartoum, Sudan, sponsored and gave presentations and tutorials at EuroBSDCon in Paris, France, organized and ran the Paris FreeBSD Developer Summit, organized and ran the FreeBSD Developer Summit at VBSDCon, sponsored and attended and talked at VBSDCon, provided travel grants for FreeBSD contributors to attend all of the above conferences, sponsored the 2017 Usenix Security Symposium in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, as an industry partner, provided FreeBSD advocacy material for all of these, and sponsored the 2017 Usenix Annual Technical Conference in Santa Clara, California, as an industry partner. And that was in 1 quarter, so 3 months.
Yeah, we've been busy, yeah. And most of this is just talking to people and companies and trying to get to feel the pulse of the community, but also educating new people who have never heard about FreeBSD before. So this is something people should look out for in the future because we are still getting warmed up with our involvement there.
Yep, there's also an update from the FreeBSD continuous integration team. Always looking for more people there, but they've introduced some Dtrace test pipelines with the results and artifacts available at artifacts.freebsd.org. And attended 2 developer summits, BSD Cam and EuroBSDCon, and presented during those. Still need help fixing some of the failing test cases and builds, so always need more people helping out there. They would also like to create builds for additional architectures and add even more tests, and they have a whole to-do list. So if you want to get involved, especially if you have any experience with Jenkins, the team would love to have you. Mm-hmm. In the kernel, we got a number of updates, including the Intel 10 gigabit iflib driver update. The IX and IXV network interface drivers support a variety of Intel network interfaces. With the help of Matt Macy and Sean Bruno, among others, they submitted a review to Fabricator to get that up there. And they also started work on the conversion of the 40 gig driver, the IXL driver. Separately, the Intel iWarp support. And so iWarp is a protocol suite that enables efficient movement of data across the network, building a remote direct memory access or direct data placement, and so on. It endeavors to avoid the unnecessary local data copies and to offload work from the main CPU to dedicated hardware. So pulling data over the network and accessing it directly instead of then copying it into main memory. An initial commit adding iWarp support to the Intel X722 family of network adapters is under review. This is an important step towards introducing full iWarp support on systems equipped with Intel C620 series chipsets. Currently, that's with the IXL driver as well.
Okay, yeah, people should test that if they have devices that work with iWarp.
Yes, I have one of these, or a bunch of these C620 systems, so that'd be interesting to look at. We also have a further update to the PNFS stuff. So Rick provides an update here saying a PNFS server allows an NFS service to be spread over multiple physical servers, separating the metadata operations from the data operations, like reading and writing. This project will add the ability to use FreeBSD systems to create a PNFS service consisting of a single metadata server plus some arbitrary number of data servers. The data servers can be mirrored so that redundant copies of the files are maintained. The support for non-mirrored data servers is now believed to be complete. Support for mirrored data servers using the flexible file layout, which will soon be published as a RFC, is implemented. However, there is still significant work to be done since the current implementation of mirrored data servers does not handle failed data servers or the resilvering and recovery process. It is hoped that support for failure and recovery of data servers will be implemented over the next 6 months. The patched FreeBSD source tree may be accessed for testing via either Subversion or downloading a gzip tarball. They consist of a patched kernel and NFSD and can be used on any FreeBSD 11 or later system. The installation procedure is covered in the document, which is linked here.
Okay, excellent. So people should try that out and provide feedback so that it...
Yes, especially if you do quite a bit of stuff with NFS and would benefit from having, say, your VM images or whatever you're using over NFS stay up even if one of the servers goes down.
Okay, we also have updates in the architectures area. We're looking at AMD Zen, which is the Ryzen family support. And so this quarter, a bit of work was done to enhance the platform support for the Ryzen Threadripper and the EPYC processors. And apparently the CPU topology detection was enhanced to properly detect the Zen, dies on the motherboard and the CPU complexes. This gives the scheduler more locally information to use when making scheduling decisions, so it knows about the CPUs and can make it use those more efficiently. And also the x86 topology analysis was enhanced to report dies and CPU complexes in addition to the existing reporting of packages, so that people can see things like there's an example here for what is this, a Threadripper thing? No, probably not. So this it tells you in the booting message that you have one packages with 2 groups and 2 cache groups with 4 cores and 2 hardware threads. So everything you always wanted to know about your connected CPU. There's also an improvement in CPU temperature monitoring support for the Zen. This has been added to the AMD temp driver. So this is reporting your CPU temperature, which is always important. CPU frequency updates are also added, so they added the actual support for decoding the Zen P-state information from the machine state registers and worked around the apparent Ryzen inability to achieve the P1 state by not busying cores waiting for transition to it. A bunch of other stuff, so apparently their overall assumption at this point, or their evaluation, is that Zen is now a very usable platform for x86 workstations and servers. And this project was sponsored by Dell EMC Isilon, so this is a nice way of collaborating with industry as well, so thanks Dell. Userland programs. Oh, that's always good stuff, because people can see those updates mostly right away. So this one is about GDB, the GNU debugger. So this starts with that the port, which is in Devel, has been updated to GDB 8.0.1. Which includes support for FreeBSD AMD 64, or not AMD 64, ARM Arch 64, so that the userland binaries you have there can be properly debugged.
Yeah, so if you have like an Overdrive 1000 or a Raspberry Pi 3 or something, you can actually debug what's going wrong on that architecture now. They also upstream patches added improved support for FreeBSD and ARM, so 32-bit ARM. Userland binaries are currently in review. FreeBSD 12 has recently grown support for debugging VFP registers via the Dtrace and core dumps as part of this work. Support for FreeBSD ARM kernels will be added to the port after the upstream patches are added. They've also added support for SIG-info, which has been committed upstream. This uses recently added NT LWP info note to extract signal information from a process's core.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
And they also fixed a bug where GDB's kill command would hang instead of killing things like it was supposed to. But there's still some open work to figure out why PowerPC KGDB targets are not able to unwind the stack past the initial frame, and test support for Spark 64, and add some more PowerPC stuff, and implement the info proc and info OS commands.
Okay. In the ports area, so there were some changes affecting the ports collection also. So that's one of the benefits that we have, that FreeBSD is not only the kernel but also the userland. This also includes the ports collection, so that all makes it work nicely together. So these are pretty much updates to freedesktop.org. So this is from
so this is the FreeBSD desktop project is where the work lives to import the Intel graphics driver updates. So now they have the graphics DRM-next-kmod. This port for FreeBSD current provides support for the AMD GPU driver, the i915 driver, and the Radeon driver. all those DRM modules using the Linux KPI compatibility framework. This port currently corresponds to the DRM driver that's in Linux 4.9 and is in an experimental state. It works reliably for many testers with modern GPUs, including the AMD HD 7000 series, also known as Tahiti, or covering Tahiti through Polaris, and the Intel HD 3000 or Sandy Bridge up to Skylake. Broader testing and reporting and fixing of bugs is appreciated. Open tasks including resolving issues with the Radeon KMS driver and AMD GPU drivers that fail when you boot with UEFI, although there is a workaround, and to upgrade to the Linux 4.10 and later DRM versions going forward, and to get more feedback from broader testing across more hardware.
Okay. A new port, or this is actually a new initiative, is OpenJFX 8. So if you haven't heard about this before, like me, OpenJFX is an open source next generation client application platform for desktop and embedded systems based on, you guessed it, by the J, it's based on Java SE. So this quarter, the OpenJFX port was reworked and has received some significant improvements. Apparently, modules are being built now, and a new web module to gain support for applications that have their own built-in web browser, such as ASCII docfx. And new media modules allow JavaFX applications to play audio and video files. There's also a scene builder, JavaFX port, a RAD tool for building JavaFX scenes, which was also added to the ports tree. And the OpenGL Prism backend for GPU acceleration was enabled by default, so you can make use of your GPU for accelerating those OpenGL shaders or whatever you might have. And from the maintainers and contributors perspective, the port was simplified by moving all FreeBSD local patches to the ports tree and fetching the upstream sources directly instead of using a separate repository for them. And they have open tasks to upstream some of the patches in the ports collection. And I'll let Alan read the Puppet section here, because that's his thing.
So this summer, they created the Puppet team, so that's puppet at freebsd.org, to manage the 30 or so Puppet-related ports in FreeBSD, so that there's a larger group of people that have approval to commit to those ports and so on instead of one person. So prevents some of these ports are related to others and they have to be updated in sync, and waiting for the maintainer approval on all of them adds a bunch of delay. So anyway, they have the team working on it now, which is better for everybody, and they now have added Puppet 5 to the ports tree, and the C++ version of Factor got a lot of attention and is now a drop-in replacement for the old Ruby version, or also called RFactor. It is now the default, if you install Puppet 5, is to use the C++ version instead of the Ruby version. And they're also working on the Puppet Server version 5 and keeping all those ports up to date. Open tasks include that the package provider that's part of Puppet has some minor issues where it doesn't work properly if there are no repos configured, or just not working correctly with mcollective. And then the Puppet database 3, 4, and 5 and Puppet server 4 and 5 ports rely on Clojure and Java. And because of that, they download already compiled jars rather than building them from source. And we would prefer that wasn't what they did.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. There's also updates in the documentation section. So the noteworthy changes in the documentation tree that we have here are the Absolute FreeBSD 3rd edition announcement. So this one is pretty much available in stores now, and many have that probably been gifted for Christmas holidays, maybe.
I don't think it's out for print yet.
It's not yet?
No. It's not self-published. It goes through a traditional publisher. It takes longer. Also, it's going to be like this thick. It takes a while.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't stop people from, from gifting it. Yeah. So in any case, the update here is from Michael W. Lucas, of course, who wrote there that the first draft of the 3rd edition of Absolute FreeBSD is finished. It is 220,200 words long or big, roughly equivalent to stun a medium-sized ox, if you hit it over with the head. And it's on target to be in print before BSDCan 2018. That's okay. That's the official print release date. Yeah, I read a bunch of those chapters as proofreaders, so it's definitely good. If it comes out, people, you should get it. Open tasks there are stare at the wall blankly for a few days. Oh, still on the show. Fix all the problems pointed out by dozens of community reviewers. There are also problems pointed out by John Baldwin, who did the tech review for the whole edition. So he's the person to blame if something is wrong. Probably
not quite.
Not much, but yeah. Editing, copy editing, page layout, page editing, re-editing, indexing, edits discovered by indexer. So these are all the stuff that are being necessary to make a book work so that you can look at and on which page is ZFS mentioned the first, so that you have a proper index and stuff like that. Pre-orders should open sometime next year, so we'll probably announce that when that's available. And Michael also notes that he should restrain himself from strangling people who ask when the 4th edition is coming. Yep, that's typical Michael. Yeah, so thanks for that update. And we also have updates in the manual pages section. So I've heard Warren Block talk a lot of times about we should have proper documentation about writing man pages properly, or some kind of document where people can look at or refer themselves to if they want to work on a man page. And finally, he sat down and made that happen. So over the last year, he writes, interest has increased to manual pages, in large parts due to the excellent infrastructure work by Baptiste and others, and promotion by George Neville Neal and others. So this increased interest has been both gratifying and problematic, because as more people want to write man pages, the more people are asking for documentation about how to do this. So our man pages are underappreciated gems, but we have sadly lacked any substantial documentation on how to write new ones. And
doing one from scratch can be quite a... it seems a bit daunting at first. And there's this... So that makes people want to go and copy some existing one and edit it. But, if the existing one isn't perfect, then you end up spreading the badness.
You copy the errors multiple times, yeah. So in September, he sat down to add a new chapter to the FreeBSD documentation project primer, which is linked on the FreeBSD website, to describe the basics of creating a man page. So it includes descriptions of the markup, what section structure there is, how you can recommend, or what recommended optional materials should be in there, such as examples. Always have examples in man page. And sample templates for the most common types of man pages, so you can just copy and paste and edit them as you need. And the resources section also includes links to several external resources, including the excellent practical Unix manuals, MDoc. So these will be the new standard, or pretty much are already. So this chapter is not a full tutorial, but it does begin to fill in a large gap in other documentation resources and provide a starting point from which to grow. And yes, patches are welcome if you want to extend this one. So the open tasks there are to add more explanation and examples of markup usage, expand the sample templates with additional desired standard features like an example section, and add more sample templates. So yeah, thanks, Warren, for doing that work. It's much appreciated, and hopefully this will spark a lot of people joining the documentation project or submitting patches with man pages, or at least man page updates.
Yep. And then we have the FreeBSD Foundation's Q4 update. Most of it I think was already covered a bit, but there's quite a bit going on. In particular, don't forget about the upcoming events section here. There'll be a FreeBSD Mini Dev Summit the day before FOSDEM. So if you're going to be in Brussels for FOSDEM and are around on Friday, you might want to be attending that. Then obviously FOSDEM. Later, there'll be Apricot, which will be in Nepal, in Kathmandu. And then in March, we'll have AsiaBSDCon and Scale. So those are happening at the same time, so sadly you can't go to both.
Yeah, it's difficult. But if there's a conference in your area and you have time, then why not say hi and look what the BSDs are doing?
If you do go to one of these or something else, do write in and tell us how your experience was. We find it's the best way to get more people interested in going is to share experiences of people, especially if it's their first time at a new conference or their first conference ever.
Yeah, and most of these people are, or of these reports are, just sparking with excitement and the good times they had, and try to express the great things that they saw, and it's just a very nice thing to read.
So the message starts off with a message from Deb Goodkin, the executive director of the FreeBSD Foundation, saying, "Dear FreeBSD community members, as we get ready to publish our last newsletter of the year, I'm sitting here overwhelmed with pride for my team and what we've accomplished so far this year. Although we are in a high-tech world, our sole purpose is to serve the FreeBSD community and the project. We couldn't do this work without our team's dedication and passion in supporting the FreeBSD community and making FreeBSD the best operating system available for free to everyone around the world." And it says, below you'll find just some of the accomplishments from the past year, such as software development projects to improve FreeBSD, our college internship program, the FreeBSD advocacy at past and future events, and how beneficial it has been to have full-time staff members leading these release engineering efforts. However, it takes more than a dedicated staff and a group of volunteers to provide the amount of support we provide for FreeBSD. It also takes a lot of funding. Since we are not a trade organization like many other open source projects, like the Linux Foundation isn't actually a non-profit, it's a trade association. And so it charges a membership and offers benefits, which is different than what the FreeBSD Foundation does. So because of that, the FreeBSD Foundation relies solely on individual and corporate or corporations who benefit from FreeBSD to give back in ways that will keep us sustainable. In particular, part of that, to meet the IRS's public good test, need a large number of individual donors. So we'd like to get that number up. Now that we're heading into the final week of 2017, I'm going to ask you for one more thing. Please help us meet our fundraising goals so that we can continue the work that we're doing. Your support directly impacts the project by allowing us to help keep FreeBSD secure and reliable, to increase the adoption of FreeBSD around the world, and to increase our software development contributions, truly making FreeBSD the best platform for education, research, computing, and products.
Yep. And there's more stuff in there, like the fundraising update we pretty much covered already. And we have a bunch of conference recaps and trip reports. So there's a trip report by Mathieu Arnauld about BSD Camp 2017. It's been in August, but it's still a valid read. There's EuroBSDCon 2017 conference recaps by Deb Goodkin herself, and Usenix Lisa conference recaps also by her, as well as a trip report by Mahdi Mokhtari at EuroBSDCon 2017. So this is his first major BSD conference, and I think he had a very good time there. Li Wen also went to EuroBSDCon and provided a trip report. And also BSD Taiwan had a bunch of people in there, and Li Wen also wrote a nice conference recap about that first conference in Taiwan.
And I see here Ed invented a new month of the year, Desicacember.
It's like me not getting the proper month pronounced. Yeah,
well, he added a couple of extra letters to the word December.
Oops. Yeah, maybe this fell through proofreading, but yeah. Okay.
There's also a short thing in here from Cleverbridge explaining why they chose FreeBSD. And then ongoing support, the different projects that are being worked on, including the RAID Z expansion. If that's useful to you, you should help donate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a nice recap of the pretty much the full year and what we did this year, and of course, stay tuned for what we're coming up with for the project and the community in 2018.
Yep, quite a bit of stuff. So you can see just how much was accomplished, and we'd like next year to accomplish even more.
Yep, we're busy working on this, and your donations make that work much easier and enable some of these things in the first place. All right, moving on to our new topic.
So first, we'll mention our sponsor, IX Systems. So head over to ixsystems.com/BSD now and get the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. The second biggest contributor to the success of FreeBSD sometimes, I think, is IX Systems.
Yeah, they sponsor a lot of conferences on their own. They also send their people there to tell the community about the stuff they're doing for the community. Efforts like TrueOS or
FreeNAS.
FreeNAS, all these things are pretty much good efforts to not only grow the community but make FreeBSD as a platform more widespread and make it as something that people want to check out as a server or as a platform to build their own product on. Or if you're looking for a backup solution, then give IX System a call, because they are the ones who've built many of these systems for open source purposes. And if you tell them exactly what this system should do, rather than I want these, and these components, they can build you a package that is much better suited for your needs and also has the components fixing properly or matching properly so that you get the best performance out of the system.
Yeah, even the FreeBSD Foundation buys the hardware that runs the FreeBSD cluster. The one things, we just tell IX, hey, we're going to use this system to build packages. So it needs lots of RAM, but it doesn't actually need fast disks or anything because it all happens in memory anyway. We do all the compiles on tempfs and then flush them out to ZFS after. So it doesn't need fancy high disk bandwidth stuff. Just needs as many cores as possible at the highest frequency possible and all of the RAM.
Yeah. So this is what they build, and they don't tell you, but you need this component just to rack up the bill a little bit. This is exactly, they build it to your needs and don't try to push more stuff on you that you don't need.
Right. And then we get in touch with them as, actually what we need now is a new FreeBSD update build server. So that's different. And we need these, optimized for these uses and so on.
Or other things.
Again, it gets down to what's going to happen with this machine is they're going to build it at IX, test it for us, then install FreeBSD the way the FreeBSD cluster team wants it set up, and then ship it to a data center in New York or New Jersey, whereas the closest person on the cluster admin team lives in Pennsylvania. So, barring some extraordinary event, there's going to be nobody from the FreeBSD cluster admin team that's going to physically touch this server anytime soon. So it needs to be set up so that the people that donate the colocation New York internet for the FreeBSD cluster team can just put it in the rack, plug in the cables and the power, and have it just work. And IX makes that happen. Especially when all your sysadmins are volunteers in the FreeBSD project, you want to make it as easy as possible for them, and IX takes care of that. It means nobody ends up pulling their hair out, which is really good. Most of us don't have very much hair.
Don't look at me. They also have a bunch of updates on their blog. So they have a list of best of 2017, the best videos they did, and the best product builds or disk price analysis that they did. So this is pretty much a good wrap-up of the whole engagement they had over the year. And also there's a new bad thing going around, the storage crypto ransomware. And they have a little blog post about why it doesn't mean so much on the IX Systems TrueNAS servers, because they're all using ZFS and boot environments, snapshots, which pretty much takes the danger out of this encryption ransomware.
Okay, so now it's time to read Santi's naughty or nice list.
Yeah, so first, of course, the nice one. So should we do this one after the other, or good cop, bad cop style?
Yep. So people ask me, Justin, what are your favorite system calls that you look forward to their return code? Here, I reveal all. If you're in a bad mood, you might prefer the sucky syscalls that should never have existed. But we'll get to those ones in a minute.
This is a bit of a rant here, but yes. It gets to the bottom.
On Santa's good list, syscall number 0, read. You cannot go wrong with a read. You can barely fault. On Linux, AMD 64, it is syscall number 0. All of its arguments are 0. It returns 0. That's cool. So yes, reading is one of the most fundamental things you can do, and it's probably the syscall that happens the most on your system. So it makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not just reading from the disk, it's also reading from a socket or a file descriptor, so it's pretty much happening.
Anything. You read from everything. With mmap, you can even read from memory.
Yeah, right. So
then number 1, pipe. Probably the most useful thing ever. The Society for the Preservation of Historic Calling Conventions is very fond of pipe. As in many operating systems and architectures, it preserves the fun feature of returning both a file descriptor, returning both of the file descriptors as return values. At least Linux MIPS does, and NetBSD does, even on x86 and AMD 64. Multiple return values are making a comeback with languages like Lua and Go, but C has always had a bit of a funny thing about them, and they have long been supported in many calling conventions, so let's use them as syscalls. Well, this one syscall. Then KQ. When the world went all C10K on us, the scalable polling was the thing. Linux went with epoll, and the BSDs went with KQ, and Solaris went with devpoll. The nicest interface was KQ, while epoll is some mix of edge and level-triggered semantics and design errors, so bugs are still being found.
People remember the Brian Cantor interviews where he ranted for quite some time about this.
Yes.
So KQ is good.
Terrible. Yep.
Yeah.
Number 3, unshare. While this sounds like a selfish syscall, but it's this generous syscall is the basis of Linux namespaces, allowing a process to isolate its resources, and that's what containers are built on in Linux, is by calling a bunch of unshares. I don't know that that's a very good name, but okay. Number 4 is setns, which I'm guessing stands for namespace. If you liked unshare, its younger but cooler friend take file descriptors for namespaces, passing it down a Unix socket to another process or stash it for later and do that namespace switching. All of the best system calls take file descriptors.
Okay.
Then they have execve@. Despite a somewhat confusing name, FreeBSD has the saner fexecve, but other BSDs do not have support last time we checked. This syscall finally lets you execute a program just given a file descriptor for the file that you want to execute. I say finally, as Linux only implemented this in 3.19, which seems to be which means it's hard to rely on since it's not everywhere yet. Before that, glibc had a terrible user space implementation that was basically useless. Perfect for creating sandboxes, as you can sandbox a program into a file system with nothing at all in it, and with a totally controlled tree by opening a file to execute before you chroot or changing the namespace. Okay. And then another FreeBSD one here, 6pdfork. While it's too cool for Linux, you have to head over to FreeBSD for this one. Like the fork call, but you get a file descriptor for the process rather than the PID. Then you can throw it into a KQ or send it to another process. Once you have tried process descriptors, you will never go back. I've actually done the pdfork thing with a KQ, and it works very nice.
In which
Number
context?
7, signal FD. You might detect a theme here, but if you've ever written traditional 1980s style signal handlers, you know how much they suck. How about turning your signals into messages that you can read, and you guessed it, from a file descriptor? Like, usable. Then they have wstat. It's an interesting one that came from Plan 9. It does the opposite of stat, which you give it a file and it tells you it gives you back a struct of all the data about the file, metadata and so on. So wstat writes the same structure out to the disk. So instead of having to run, chmod and then chown and rename and utime or whatever, this one you would just say statafile, modify the struct however you want, and then write that struct out and perform all of those actions at once. Could have some interesting security context in just being able to chmod and chown at the same time instead of as two separate things.
Yeah.
Number 9, clone file. The only cool syscall on OS 10 and only supported on the new APFS file system. Copies whole files or directories on a single syscall using copy to write all of the data. Look at my works, copy file range, and despair.
I see a lot of ZFS people yawn by now, so...
Well, on ZFS, you can't clone an individual file, only a whole file system.
That's true, but the whole copy on write thing is pretty much old news.
APFS has that, but doesn't checksum your data, only your metadata. It's kind of weird. Mm-hmm. And number 10, the last one on the list, is Pledge, the little sandbox that worked. OpenBSD only here. They've managed to make a simple sandbox that was practical for real programs, like the base OpenBSD system. Capsicum from FreeBSD and promised for Linux for years, but with no sign of progress, is a lovely design and gives us PD fork, but it still kind of difficult and intrusive to implement. Linux has, seccomp and LSMs and so on, but still nothing that's usable for an average person or program.
Mm-hmm. So where did you use the PD fork?
Actually, while I was capsicumizing a rather complicated program. In order to isolate it, I would fork the program and do the work. So the outer program would loop over all the files and do all those stuff and had the privileges, but didn't do any of the work. Then it would fork itself with PD fork and enter the sandbox and do the work on only the one file with the file descriptor it had. And then it would KQ and wait for these, and it could run multiple of them at a time to make it faster as well, so that if you're running this operation on 100 files, you could run 10 of them at a time or something. Do all the work, wait till it was all done, and then collect the exit statuses and finish.
Okay. All right, so these are the good ones. Now on to the naughty list.
Yes, now we're on to the naughty list for syscalls.
So yeah, stay away from those if you can. This one starts also with a zeroth system call, which is ioctl, or IOCTL if you pronounce it this way. It can't decide if its arguments are integers, strings, or some struct that is lost in the midst of time. Make up your mind. Plan 9 was invented to get rid of this. Okay, this starts off.
Kind of the most evil of the syscalls. Although without it, we would have to have, hundreds of extra syscalls or something. So,
yeah. It's there. We have to live with it. So, yeah. On to number 1.
I guess we could come up with NVCTL, where the argument is always an NV list of the parameters, and just make everything use that. But then that would only really work for the base system because you're not going to get random other people doing it. But
okay. Number 1 is FCNTL, just like ILCTL, but for some different miscellaneous operations, because one miscellany is not enough. Number 2, Tuxcall. Linux put a web server in the kernel to win a benchmark contest with Microsoft. It had its own syscall. My enum tux_reactions are yuck. Don't worry, though, it was a distro patch thanks to Red Hat and never made it upstream, so only the man page and reserved numbers survive to taunt you and remind you that the path of the righteous is beset by premature optimization. Oh, excellent. That. Oh, yes. That's what happens if you're doing premature stuff. And, keep it around. Okay, number 3 is I/O setup. The Linux asynchronous I/O syscall are almost entirely useless. Almost nothing works. You have to use O_direct for a start. and they still barely work. They have one use, benchmarking SSDs, to show what speed you could get if only there was a usable API. What async I/O in kernel? Use Windows. Oh, gee, this is super ranty. Okay, it gets better with number 4, stat and its friends and relatives. Yes, this one is useful, but can you find the data structure it uses? We have old stat, old fstat, ustat, old lsstat, statfs, fstatfs, stat, lstat, fstat, and it goes on, stat64, and there's a whole list. So for statting files and links and file systems in Linux, a new bunch of stuff will be along soon for Y2038, because why not? Simplify your life, use a BSD, where they cleaned up the mess that they did the cooking, as they did the cooking. So Linux on 32-bit platforms is just sucky in comparison and will get worse. And don't even look at MIPS, where the padding is wrong. Oh, gee, we're...
Interesting. Well, the BSDs got rid of all the 64s and so on. We also have stat-at and fstat-at. We have all the at versions for working with file descriptors.
And remember,
yes,
we're not the ones, we're just reading this. We're not ranting. We're just reading what's been sent to us. Okay. Number 5, Linux on MIPS. Not a syscall, a whole implementation of the Linux ABI. Unlike the lovely clean BSDs, Linux is different on each architecture. System calls randomly take arguments in different orders, and constants have different values. And there are special syscalls. But MIPS takes the biscuit, the whole packet of biscuits. It was made to be binary compatible with old SGI machines that don't even exist, and has more syscall ABIs that I have had hot dinners. Clean it up. Make a new sane MIPS ABI and deprecate the old ones. Nothing like adding another variant. So annoying, I think I threw out all my MIPS machines, each different. Gee. Okay. Number 6 is iNotify or FA Notify and friends. Linux has no fewer than 3 file system change notification protocols. The first, dnotify, hopped on iOctal's sidekick fcntl, while the 2 later ones, iNotify and FA Notify, added a bunch more syscalls. You can use any of them, and they still not provide the notification API you want for most applications. So most people use the second one, iNotify, and curse it. Did you know KQ can do this on the BSDs? Our number 7 is personality. So oozing in personality, but we just don't get along. Basically obsolete, as the kernel can decide what kind of system emulation to do from binaries directly. It stays around with some use cases in persuading /configure. It is running on 32-bit systems. But it can turn off ASLR and let the CVEs right into your system. We need less personality. Number 8 is get time of day. Still has an obsolete time zone value for an old times when people thought time zones would go all the way to the kernel. Now we know that your computer should not know. Set its clock to UTC. Do the time zones in the UI based on where the user is, not the computer. You should use clock_get_time now. Don't even talk to me about locales. This syscall is fast enough, but don't use it for benchmarking. It's on the VDSO. So number 9 is splice and T. These, back in 2005, were quite a nice idea, although Linux said then, it is incomplete, the interfaces are ugly, and it looks oops the system if anything goes wrong. Yeah, so it won't oops your system now, but usage has not taken off. The nice idea from Linus was that a pipe is just a ring buffer in the kernel that can have a more general API and use cases for performant code, but a decade on it, it hasn't really worked out. It was also supposed to be a more general send file, which in many ways was the successor of what Tux web server is, but I think sendfile is still more widely used.
Because it was invented on BSD.
Yeah, one reason. Well, it was a good idea, but if it doesn't get adoption, then it's just not getting there.
I think OpenBSD has some kind of splice-like thing that I think works better as well.
That's what I would thought of OpenBSD, yeah, doing that properly. And number 10 is user fault FD. Yes, I like file descriptors. Yes, CRUI is kind of cool. CRIU is that. But user space handling page faults is nothing sacred. I get that you can do this badly with a 6, segfault in this case, so segfault here, segfault handler, but talk about lipstick on a pig. Ooh, that's kind of, a long list of badness.
Yep. Luckily, a number of those don't apply to us.
Yeah, luckily. And even, didn't George Neville-Neal also deprecate a syscall this year during BSD Cambridge?
I think he got rid of one. I forget what it was, though.
So
it wasn't one I used, so I wouldn't remember.
So don't add more syscalls, just clean up some of the older ones and make everyone more more happy, less ranty.
Yes, and the final story of our news section that's been over an hour now. OpenBSD 6.0 on an iMac G3 from 1999.
Oh, okay.
Starts off, it says, a while ago I spent $50 on an iMac G3, aka the iMac 1. This iconic model restored Apple's fortunes in the late 90s. Since the iMac G3 can still boot Mac OS's 8 and 9, I mostly use the machine to indulge in nostalgia for childhood school days spent poking at the operating system and playing Escape Velocity. But before I get around to that, I decided to try out the software that the previous owner had left on the machine. An antiquated OS 10.2 and a 12-year-old version of Safari and Internet Explorer were too slow and old to use for anything. Updating to newer software was almost impossible, and later OS X is required to run the little PowerPC compatible software still languishing in forgotten corners of the internet. This got me thinking, could this machine be really used nowadays? Lacking a newer OS X disk, I decided to try the most recent OpenBSD release, and since then, to retry with each OpenBSD release. Below are the results of this experiment, plus a working xorg.conf file. So you can see what the iMac looks like there.
Yeah, if you don't remember or haven't owned any of those, so it's an old machine.
Revision D iMac G3 in the grape color.
Yeah, it's the transparent one that has all these different components shown from the inside. Yeah.
Does it mention what the specs are? I don't see it. It's got a CD drive.
Down there, isn't it?
And the machine's memory has been upgraded from 32 megabytes that it came with to 320 megabytes. Thank goodness.
Well, that's what the state of the art was back then.
So anyway, installing OpenBSD on the iMac, it was simple. It's the same procedure to install OpenBSD on any modern AMD 64 rig. You put in the installation disk, you tell the machine to boot from it, and then you answer a few prompts, most of which simply ask you to press enter. In this case, OpenBSD recognizes all machines' hardware just fine, including sound and networking, though I had a little trouble with video. The OpenBSD documentation says video should just work, and that an xorg.conf file isn't necessary. As such, it no longer ships with an xorg.conf file, though that's never posed a problem on any of the other OpenBSD machines. It did cause a problem here. Video doesn't work out of the box on this iMac. StartX just blanks the screen. Fortunately, because the BSDs use a centralized development model where each operating system is stored in one repository, OpenBSD's website provides a web interface to the source code going back to the early days, so he was able to go back and get the last version of xorg.conf that got shipped for the Mac PowerPC with a little tweaking. He made a file that you can download there, drop it in the X11 directory, and it's good to go.
Okay.
You have to set the machine-dependent allow aperture sysctl to 2. Otherwise, it won't be able to access the graphics memory.
So it's good that we have repositories that go way back to the early days, so that people can still pull files that are still working on old systems, among other things.
It says the machine performs okay under OpenBSD. You can expect to ably run minimalistic software under minimalistic window managers. They ran Dillo, MRXVT, and CMUS under CWM and FWWM, or FVWM. Performance here was just fine. I was able to run Firefox 26, 33, and 34 under both window managers. Firefox ran, but modern JavaScript-heavy sites were an exercise in frustration. The 2015 version of CNN.com basically froze Firefox for 30 seconds or more. A lighter browser like Dillo was doable. You'll notice that I used the past tense to talk about Firefox. Firefox currently doesn't build for PowerPC on OpenBSD. Neither does Chromium. Neither do a fair number of other applications. But whatever. There's still a lot of lighter applications available, and it's those that you'll end up using day to day on a decade-old machine.
Okay. Yeah, there's a bunch of pictures there from screenshots and how the browsers look.
One of running XFCE if you want something a little more modern. Then they ran some benchmarks comparing their iMac, which has a 333 megahertz CPU and 320 megabytes of memory, compared to an Intel Atom D525, which is what you would see in those older like netbook type computers, and against i7 2620, which would be Ivy Bridge.
Could be, yeah.
Is it what was after Ivy Bridge? Haswell. So yeah, it's Ivy Bridge. So with Ubench on the CPU, the iMac got a score of 18,000. The Atom got about 10 times that, 186,000, and the i7 got 1 million. For memory, the iMac got just shy of 10,000, the Atom 33,000, and the i7 167,000.
Okay.
So yeah, the iMac's not very fast, but he says, conclusion, except for when I checked to see if OpenBSD still works, they actually run Mac OS 9 on this machine. I have faster and better machines for running OpenBSD. If this rig were impossibly all I had left, and I was wanting to, or I was waiting on the rush delivery of something more modern, then I could use OpenBSD on my iMac. I'd have to stick to lightweight applications, but at least they'd be up to date running on a simple, stable OS.
And I mean, it's good for email writing, at least. I mean, that doesn't need much horsepower. There's some uses, although limited. But it's still nice to see that old computers still work, and people can make use of those for simple tasks. All right, time for our last news roundup this year, which is the first item having the 31st Chaos Communication Congress schedule here. So this is an event that's happening always between the years, and this is it's been moving around. So it started in Berlin, then it was in Hamburg, and now they have found a way bigger venue in Leipzig, and this is the first time they're doing this there. And this is all things happening around the Chaos Computer Club. So things like social aspects of computing, as well as new developments, security tracks are there, of course. So there's something for the geek in every one of us.
Yes, looks like a huge conference. Just a number of things going on the first day. So we highlighted a couple of talks that are BSD related or BSD adjacent. The first one here is a lecture called May Contain Dtraces of FreeBSD.
So this is an introduction about Dtrace on FreeBSD and what it can do. And this might be interesting. So these talks are, if you are not listening live, these are being live streamed and also are recorded, of course. And we provided links in the show notes so people can watch them live or the recording when it's out. Yeah,
so the notes here at the bottom from the speaker say, I'm going to introduce Dtrace and its D language by digging down into the inner workings of FreeBSD itself as it runs, looking at memory and process management, locking infrastructure and scheduling, as well as user processes. On top of that, I will use Dtrace itself to illustrate how Dtrace is doing the work. We're also going to look at some of Dtrace's internals, like some of the design decisions as well as the bytecode that is being executed in the kernel.
Yeah, so this is hopefully a nice introduction for people who haven't used Dtrace or FreeBSD, and maybe get some more people interested in those. Another talk we found is, are all the BSDs created equally? So this is a continuation or an updated talk, hopefully, by Ilya Van Sprundel about some of the security issues he found in various BSDs, and hopefully what's been done in the meantime to fix those. So that might be interested for some people that are in the security area. And also I found a talk about library operating systems that looked interesting enough for me to give it a watch. So this is on the 30th of December. So so this is about basically MirageOS and OCaml, well, actually, MirageOS is written in OCaml, and introducing the whole concept of library operating systems. And
so MirageOS is an operating system built out of libraries where you kind of use those libraries to interface with the operating system instead of, say, syscalls. But yeah, it talks about OCaml, C++, HALVM, Haskell, etc. So if you're into that whole, I don't know, new age programming, I don't know what you would call it, it's interesting. But it does get back to this idea that we see even with mobile operating systems now, where the job of the operating system is more than it used to be. It includes providing a set of services and interfaces so the application can do stuff with, well, the application has to carry around less code.
Yep. So this is...
And then finally, they have the lecture, Hardening Open Source Development. This talk discusses practical solutions to both technical and social challenges in collaboration. Not only the software we build can be flawed, but also its dependencies, our tools, or just the process of building it. Vulnerabilities in shell integrations, code linters, package managers, or compilers can become disastrous vectors for malware infections for developers. Beyond that risk, we see software shipped straight from the developer editor to a repository, through the build chain, across CDNs, referenced from package registries, almost directly to the user. Since even our favorite package managers have demonstrated large-scale malware delivery, there is reason to seriously question our ability to guarantee our own products' safety and so on. Especially on some of the Linuxes where like the packages you download from the repository were just like built on a random developer's laptop. Rather than, in the FreeBSD, packages are built, the official packages are built on official package building machines in the FreeBSD cluster that check out what's officially in SVN. Whereas if we allowed people to build them themselves, they could make deviations from what's actually in the ports tree. And we're working on package reproducibility, which is almost there, which means that if you start with the same source tree, you will build the same binary packages. So you can prove that the package you downloaded from package.freebsd.org is exactly what was in the source code.
Yeah, totally identical. So yeah, check out the full schedule of the Congress. Some of these talks are in German, but there's a fair number of English talks as well. And so there's something for everyone, I guess, to check out. All right, the next story that we have is OpenBSD 6.2 and CDE. And this is over at James Deagle's blog. So he writes, I've noticed a disruption in the time-space continuum, or space-time continuum, recently. It is likely because I have finally been able to compile and install the common desktop environment, or also CDE abbreviated, in a current and an actively developed operating system, which is OpenBSD in his case. So this comes after so many attempts across multiple platforms that end up with the build process prematurely stopping itself on its own tracks for a variety of infinitesimal reasons that were beyond his comprehension as a non-programmer. Or when there was a success, it was not without some broken parts. And as for the latter, he's been able to build CDE on OpenIndiana but with an end product where he's unable to change the color scheme in DT style because some other things are not working the way they should, and with a default color scheme that is low res and unpleasant. So his recent attempts after installing CDE on OpenBSD from version 6.1 saw the process stop due to a number of errors that are pure gibberish in those naive eyes. So while disappointing, it was on par for the course that his miserable experience with trying to build this particular desktop environment, and he also wrote this in the space in November 2015 already, in the course of explaining part of his imperative for installing Solaris 10. So come to think of building the recent open source CDE as being akin to a coffee mug he saw many years ago. One side of the mug read, "Turn the mug to see how to keep an idiot busy," and on the other side it read, "Turn the mug to see how to keep an idiot busy." Yeah, I'm through feeling like an idiot, he writes, which is partially why I'm not on 1 week journey with Solaris 10. So while he thoroughly enjoyed running Solaris 10 on his ThinkPad, he felt devilish thrill at using it out of the open at his local MacBook and iPhone-infested Starbucks, and causing general befuddlement and consternation among the occasional prying yoga mom. He never felt like he could do much with it beyond explore the SunOS 5.10 command line and watch YouTube videos. So while still supported by its current corporate owner, it is no longer actively developed and is thus little more than a retro toy. And he hated the idea of installing anything else over, but productively beckoned that it was time to tearfully and reluctantly drag himself off to the dance floor. But in any case, his last week noticed that the SourceForce page for the OpenBSD build had some 6.2 specific instructions by way of serials of a couple of patches you need to apply, and so decided, what the heck, let's give this puppy another whirl. And after initial abortive attempt at a build, I surmised that I hadn't applied the 4 patches correctly. So a day or two went by, he took a deep breath and tried again, this time resolving to not proceed with the first time world build command until he could see some sign of successful patch process. So once he had the thing up and running, and with the mind bursting with fruit flavor, I started messing about. First order of business was to create a custom color scheme modeling after default color scheme in Unixware. And like a proud papa, I immediately tweeted above the above screenshot that you can see here, and risked irritating a Linux kid or two in the process, given SCO's anticlimactic anti-Linux patent trolling from way back when. So his final thoughts about the process is, it may look a little clunky at first and maybe a little bit bling challenged, but the more I use CDE and adapt to it, the more it feels like an extension to his brain. Perhaps this is because it has a lot of zip and behaves in a consistent and coherent manner. Now that he has successfully paired his absolute favorite operating system with a desktop environment that has exerted an intense gravitational hold on him for many, many years. I don't anticipate distro hopping anytime soon, and as I attain a more advanced knowledge of CDE, he'll be chronicling any new discoveries here for the sake of anyone following him from behind as I feel my way around this darkened room. Okay, this is interesting. Mm-hmm. So for people like CDE, should check this out. It works apparently now on OpenBSD.
It looks a little bit Windows 3.1-ish to me, but...
It is definitely retro,
yeah.
But I remember having some coding assignments done in university way back when we had Sun machines, and this was the default desktop environment. So
I played with it once, I think on a Solaris machine at the power plant when I was a student in high school and worked there. I don't remember what I was doing.
It's
I
better
remember seeing
unexplained.
CDE, which I think at the time stood for Commercial Desktop Environment, and being like, oh, I bet that's something like KDE, which I had heard of, and maybe seen once or twice. But yeah, it's familiar enough you can find your way around to do stuff, so... What's really interesting is in this screenshot, it says WordPerfect, but it looks like that's the Firefox logo.
Oh, that could be a mixed up there.
Yeah. Anyway. This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean.
Yes.
Head over to digitalocean.com and sign up and get your FreeBSD or other operating system-based droplet running in under 55 seconds. For the last couple of weeks, we've been telling you about this new $15 droplet size where you get 3 gigs of memory for only $15. But
And they made it even better.
they've just cut things even more. The high CPU droplets, they now have as small as $40, and they increase the amount of memory. These price ranges used to only include 3 and 6 gigs of memory instead of 4 and 8. So now all high CPU instances have more memory than they had before for the same price. And more importantly, the high memory instances, if say you wanted to run some ZFS with a reasonable amount of storage on your on the block storage, they now have a $40 instance with 8 gigs of RAM, or the 16 gigs of RAM instance, which used to cost $120 a month, is now only $75. And 32 gigs of RAM, which used to be $240, is now $150. And all the way up. So if you want to rent a machine to do your Poudriere build, and you're going to need 128 gigs of RAM to get it done real quick, obviously rent that by the hour, don't pay for the whole month. But what used to be $960 for the month is now only $600. And that means the hourly price went down by that much as well. So instead of, I think it was $1.30 or something before, is now only 89 cents an hour.
Yeah, this is totally...
If you were building the entire FreeBSD package set, which is all 31,000 something ports, that takes, I think, somewhere in 20-ish hours, like 20 to 29 hours. If you're, say, just building a fraction of that, because you don't need all 31,000 packages, just maybe 2,000, you can get that done in just a couple of hours for a couple of dollars. And then throw it away. You know, that's the nice thing about the cloud.
Yeah, just use what you require and then switch it off. And then you only get charged for the time that you were using their services.
Mm-hmm. But yes, high memory instances are now significantly cheaper, and high CPU instances come with more memory. Or you can stick with the $5 one and, you know, run your website or your email or whatever you need to run. IRC Bouncer is good.
Yeah, I'm super happy with what I have, and it's chugging along nicely without any issues. And the web interface tells me exactly what kind of, bandwidth I'm using, how the CPU is doing, or what memory is being used. So this is a very nice thing. And it started up quickly without me having to wait for it. And this will be a very nice experience if you try it out. Definitely use our coupon code, FreeBSD.
Now?
Is it? No, wait. No, FreeBSD now. Yeah. And that will give you a $10 credit, so you can start exploring the DigitalOcean cloud and their services for $10 credit for us.
Yep. So head over to digitalocean.com, sign up. You can get started. It's super easy. And it's a great way to play with FreeBSD on somebody else's hardware. Next up, our Christmas present from our friend Warner Losh.
Oh, yeah. He's been busy, apparently, for a while now, doing cool work in the kernel space, of course. He's been pretty busy already, but he has worked on something called devmatch, not deathmatch, you online players. This is something serious, or more serious, I think.
So this new system matches unattached devices on the system to potential kernel modules that would contain a driver for it. So devmatch matches up devices in the system device tree with drivers that may match them. For each unattached device in the system, it tries to find the matching plug-and-play info in the linker hint and prints modules to load to claim the device. In -- unbound mode, devmatch can look for drivers that have attached to the device in the device tree and can plug and play and have plug and play information, but for which no PMP info exists. This helps find drivers that haven't been converted yet and are in use in the system. So we'll get back to that in a second. In addition, the ability to dump out linker.hints is provided. Future commits We'll add hooks to devd.conf and rc.d to fully automate using this information. So the eventual goal with this is that the generic kernel will get a lot smaller and contain a lot less stuff. Then devmatch will automatically load the kernel modules for any devices you actually have in your system. So it will auto-load the drivers for all the devices you have and not load things for devices you don't have. Currently, a lot of devices are built into the generic kernel so that they're just always there and just work. Whereas if we can move most of those out to modules by having a system that will auto-load the right modules so that your devices just work, it'll be great.
Yeah.
So in order for that to get there, we need help from people with lots of different hardware. And so that's why devmatch has this unbound mode, which will look at the drivers you have loaded that match your hardware, but haven't been annotated in the source code yet. And so that output sent to Warner and the other people working on this will allow those drivers to be annotated so that it will be auto-detected in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is for people who just got a new server and want to run FreeBSD on that. And they are like, well, the kernel detected a lot of stuff, but I'm not sure whether all these devices are properly detected. So in the future, devmatch will say, hey, look, this is the device I detected, and this is the driver I loaded for it. Let's just use this device. And this is pretty much saving a lot of work.
Because not all of the drivers have the extra bits to make this work yet, devmatch has this unbound mode, which will, because the driver's actually attached and working, it will be able to match them up and be like, okay, this device ID definitely means load this device or this driver. And so we'll need people to run it on lots of machines, including laptops, because one of the things we really want is when you have laptop, auto-load the right wireless driver.
And the only one that's there, not
tens and tens of wireless drivers. Having it load the right one is a big deal, because even knowing that it's an Intel whatever wireless, well, there's at least 2 or 3 different Intel wireless drivers.
Yeah. So will this also be extended in the future for devices that come and go, like USB
yes,
hardware?
That's why it mentions the devd integration, so that when you plug in a USB sound device, it will auto-load the right thing.
Yeah. Shrinking the kernel so that it doesn't take up that much main memory to make the main memory free for other uses.
Yeah, so basically one of the advantages, it'll make more and more of the device drivers modules, which also means in some cases that they can be updated more easily as well.
Separately without having to reboot the system or change the kernel or other shenanigans we have to go through currently. Yeah, so this is nice work by Warner. So
and then there's a nice follow-up, a seasonal follow-up commit here, which logs doe, never test in one tree and then commit from another tree. Fix the typo devmath to devmatch. Sponsored by Crumpus, carting off naughty committers for millennia.
Yeah, this is too nice to not mention it in the show. This is integration work. If you've done it in a while in a separate tree and try to make it work with the FreeBSD head, then this might happen. There's a nice way of, and if people are interested in that, then I guess they should contact Warner directly. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
But eventually this will be auto-loading drivers and it'll be great. So glad to see this step.
Yeah, so thanks Warner for this effort. All right, time for our Beastie Bits this week. We have a new FreeBSD journal issue available, the November-December issue. Monitoring and metrics is the overall theme, and Alan and I have articles written for that one.
Mm-hmm. So if you want to learn about monitoring and getting metrics out of Zfs, you should check out my article.
And if you want to figure out how your servers are doing, whether they're still up or do general monitoring using Isinga, then you should check out the article that I wrote together with Lars Engels and how to set this up on your FreeBSD system as a how-to style tutorial. Other things that are in there are, let me look. articles about, where's the, here it goes, STD dev. So this is standard deviation. This is an article by Paul Henning Kamp about the, what's the tool called?
Ministat?
Ministat. This is in the ports collection if you want to check it out.
No, it's
and
in the
there's
base system.
also, oh, base system even. Oh, cool. Even better. And there's a Prometheus article by Ed Scouten about monitoring and trending with Prometheus. So that's also available if you want to know about this. There's a cool article in there as well.
So check out the FreeBSD journal.
Yes, so if you have some time between the years to do some gaming, then we have you also covered in this next item about OpenBSD, the engine mix available on GOG.com.
Yes,
so this is
GOG, which is Good Old Games. Just kind of think of like Steam, but for old games. Has a list here of games that have been verified to work properly under OpenBSD. This is mostly curated by some OpenBSD people in the ports collection there working on these, but they have quite a few games on here. Some what were big titles back in the day.
I played a lot of Jagged Alliance too.
Yep, Jagged Alliance.
That was
2000.
The memories.
Elder
Theme
Scrolls
Hospital.
3,
Awesome.
Quake.
Oh, the memories, the memories. There
Doom
we go.
3, Free Space 2, Star Wars Jedi Knight, Baldur's Gate, many, many times. Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, Jedi Knight 2, Descent, Postal,
Wow.
The Settlers, Jazz Jackrabbit.
So I always wanted to have this, like, you had this game that didn't run too well on your hardware back then, and now I have all this cool BSD system available and hardware, so I'm figuring out whether this would be worthy of a retro gaming session too, because
Yes,
I think these would run much faster.
Mm-hmm. I had to indulge myself a little bit a while back. I think it was while we were in Taiwan for BSD TW. We got talking about some stuff, and I made a comment about this old video game called Pizza Tycoon. I think in Europe it was called Pizza Connection.
Oh, you played that? Oh,
yes.
Awesome.
But I think it was about the euphemisms, and so specifically one of the side mini games in that was you could be a weapons dealer.
Yeah.
And so you go to the weapons dealer, and if you ask for a rocket launcher, then you get arrested by the FBI immediately. But if you ask for, vanilla ice cream, then you get a rocket launcher.
Yeah,
Whereas
then
if
you get the
ask for,
right
like,
amount of material.
Strawberry ice cream, you get grenades or something. And we got talking about that a little bit in Taiwan with some people on the tourist day. And so when I got home, I wanted to play it, so I dug out the old discs for it and fired up DOSBox and had to play.
Yeah. Oh, this is so cool. And I mean,
For how
now
old
you could
it
run
is,
these
that game is very deep.
in what way?
There's quite a few. Well, just the number of concepts and stuff that it has is just, it's a lot more complicated than most games nowadays.
But I mean, now you could run these in memory file systems to make that speed it up much more.
Well, you wouldn't even need that. The whole thing's like 3 megabytes.
Yeah. And I mean, with ZFS, you could make use of the compression, and but I mean, the memory bus is big enough now that you.
Well, yes, it's so few megabytes now that it just doesn't even matter.
But yeah, it would be certainly a good thing to revive some of these old games. So if only.
But yes, this is just a list that's sorted out and it has details for each of them, even mentioning where you can find it in ports to run it. So like the XCOM one here, OpenXCOM is in ports and no issues with playing for more than 20 hours.
We'll see. That's almost half the campaign. Yeah, and I mean, I guess some of the other BSDs might also work, so it's not totally limited to OpenBSD.
Yep.
But yeah, we digress. Speaking of OpenBSD, the OpenBSD Foundation has reached their 2017 fundraising goal. They even exceeded that. Mm-hmm. So they set their goal initially for 300,000 Canadian dollars. Yeah. And they already have $340,000. Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yes.
So,
I wonder how much of that is just because the exchange rate has been in their favor.
Yeah, that could be an issue, but a good one in their case. So, yeah, that's nice of them meeting their goals. And you can read on the OpenBSD Foundation website what they're using the money for and their activities in this year.
Yep. And the nice thing for them is that the total from all small donors is platinum level. It's their second biggest sponsor is collectively all the individual donors.
Oh, yeah, excellent.
But also big donations from Smartisan, which we covered earlier in the year, Yandex, Facebook, and the Pineapple Fund, 2Key Security Solutions, Genua from Germany, Microsoft, and Target were the big donors in 2017.
Oh, very nice.
But yes,
so
I'd like to see
they still accept donations, so you might as well give them a little money because they're using, I think, most of this for hackathons that we've been reporting throughout the year.
Yep.
And to make that work and continue to improve OpenBSD, donations are warmly welcome there.
Yeah, I'd like to see the total from small donors on FreeBSD go up as well. So,
yeah, we can't mention it enough. All right. Yeah, we'll see how this goes until the year draws to an end. All right. Our next item that we have is a YouTube video about TrueOS 17.12, a review, and it's titled An Easy BSD. So this looks promising. So people should check that one out if you want to get the latest from
TrueOS. They got a nice TrueOS desktop sorted out here.
Mm-hmm. And reviewing some of the features that they had probably.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
It's a good review of the new release that just came out, so check it out.
Yep. And our last item for the security-minded folks, of course, is the new LibreSSL 2.6.4 version has been released. So this has a small couple of issues been fixed. This is basically the first stable maintenance release from 2.6 series. It contains following changes from 2.6.3. Three things. They made the TLS config parse protocols work correctly when passed a null pointer for a protocol string. This issue was found by Samari, who also provided the diff. So thanks for that. They corrected the TLS extensions handling when no extensions are present. Because if no TLS extensions are present in a client hello or server hello, they omit the entire extension block rather than including it with a length of 0. And they also fixed portable builds on older Android systems and systems without IPv6_TC T class. So yeah, LibreSSL keeps improving and making the OpenSSL code base much better. Very nice.
And the feedback section this week is brought to you by Tarsnap. Head over to tarsnap.com/BSD now and make your New Year's resolution to start doing your backups.
Yeah, why not? And while you're there, you might as well make that secure and with no one else except you being able to read those backups that you're doing.
You don't want 2018 to be the year you lost your data. So back it up.
Yeah. And in case you also want to have, not only a local backup, but also a remote backup. So in case your house burns down or any other disaster strikes, you can still get your files back. So this is the offline backup in your Amazon cloud. So Tarsnap manages all that for you, key generation and key handling, as well as the file deduplication and encryption, of course, as well as uploading it to the cloud and getting it back when you need it. And this has all been done in a nice and easy way. If you know how to use Tar, then Tarsnap is right there for you and easy to use.
Yep. So you just head over there, sign up. Takes only $5 to get started. And that, depending on how much you back up, that $5 can go a long way.
Yeah, and if you are running short, they will notify you, and then you can charge up a little bit more. But for a small couple of files, then it's a good way of investing your money.
Yes. The other thing is because it's pay-as-you-go, you pay and then you back up, means the bill is never a surprise. You're never going to spend more money than you put in the account. And, it makes sure that you never get surprised. So head over there, check it out, do your backups. You'll thank me later.
Yeah, people want to have restore, but they don't want to have backups. And with this, they have a good way of doing that. All right, going into our feedback and questions section for the last week of the year, we have a question from Mike about BSD episode, I guess BSD Now episode 217 and winning over Linux users. He writes, "Hi, I love the show. Thanks for all your work porting out the episodes like clockwork. Regarding your comments on why more people don't switch from Linux to FreeBSD, a friend of his at work has played a bit lately trying FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and possibly NetBSD, and these are his experiences as he heard about it over lunches." So these are a bunch of feedback, actually. Should I read that all or just
Sure.
fly over it? Yeah, okay. So first, he had a home server or gateway he wanted to run on it. He started out seeing quite committed, even enthusiastic, because getting ZFS on Ubuntu Linux was still not as well integrated into their installer. And he also told him that FreeBSD ZFS is likely more mature. Yes, it is, from what I've heard. And also, it didn't work out because the installer failed. It sounded to him like a driver problem or possibly glitchy hardware that, for whatever reason, worked better with Linux than FreeBSD. So this colored...
I don't know what could have gone wrong there. Like, without an error message or something, it's...
it's sketchy to discuss, yeah.
But
then
I've seen it used on hardware, new and old. Like it says, this was a Dell server from 2006 or so. While that's relatively old, there's not really a reason that wouldn't work. That is getting old enough to where I wonder if it was 64-bit. ZFS will work on 32-bit, but I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah. So if you have more specifics, then or let him send a follow-up maybe. But then he tried on a laptop, a relatively new ThinkPad. He also didn't get the model, but if he has more, then you could convince him to write us. He tried each of FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and NetBSD and ended up with OpenBSD, seeming to be the most viable on this machine. He's not sure why, but since that's his preference, he encourages him in that direction. So yeah, this is a viable alternative. Well then, he complained that OpenBSD does not lay down a bootable MBR. So let's understand. So this we had this in a previous episode, right?
I don't know. MBR but in general, if OpenBSD did not lay down a bootable master boot record, it would never boot. So yeah, that's not. And I think the author of the email to us actually says that later. He says, I know OpenBSD can write a perfectly good MBR.
Yeah.
And so on. Apparently, the problem was trying to dual boot. And so because there was something already in place, OpenBSD didn't overwrite it, which is mostly what you'd want, I think. But that was a surprise to a person who was used to Linux, which just makes guesses at what you were wanting to do and tries to do it.
Yeah. But this is new territory for people, so there might be some expectations that are different. But I know OpenBSD can write a perfectly good MBR, he writes, and can share a disk with Linux. He's done it himself. So what was the problem? It goes back and forth a little bit about being able to write a bootable MBR. But this is pretty much trying to install a boot manager that could just solve this. Also, he writes, he thinks there's a problem with Grub's native BSD boot modules, at least the OpenBSD ones. It seems to know...
one of the problems you get there is most BSD people don't use Grub, and so don't know the recommended way to do it. It is... Sometimes I feel like maybe it'd be nice to have a little section in the FreeBSD handbook about booting FreeBSD from Grub. But at the same time, I'm like, why? And also, it's like, it's just going to end up being out of date eventually. And at that point, does it become more harmful than not having it? I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, sometimes people want to get to their old operating system they're migrating from rather than doing the jump right now. virtual machines could help there, so you don't have to sacrifice your initial system.
Yeah, I think part of that is probably partly why dual booting has become a bit less of a thing. And then the other one is with UEFI, and you can install something like Refind and just have it all work magically. That's so much nicer than every time you're trying to add an operating system to your multi-boot and it overwrites the MBR, and then you can't boot the other operating systems, and then the new one doesn't have the right tools to set up the multi-booting, and it all goes haywire.
Okay. The other issue there was, which he also has with Debian versus Ubuntu and Mint, is that he expects wireless to work during the install without any special attention on his part. And he claims that OpenBSD doesn't support his wireless card, which I'm skeptical of, since he has said it was some kind of Intel wireless, which I thought was really well supported in general. Perhaps it's too new, or perhaps it's just a matter of him needing to run firewall update or FW update. So his own experience now, trying to run FreeBSD, the issue was hardware support. He had a machine that OpenBSD didn't run on, so tried FreeBSD, and it failed during the installer too. It ended up on NetBSD, and then ran Dragonfly for a while until discovering OpenBSD corrected whatever the problem was. Curious that there was a machine out there about 10 years ago that Dragonfly ran on that FreeBSD didn't, isn't it? It expected that the largest and most difficult problem the BSDs have versus Linux is the hardware support. Well, this
I'm not sure where the installer failed, although if it was 10 years ago, then
it's still, well, that's still
that was before I touched the installer.
Yeah, this is still the old sys installer.
Outside of not supporting the disk controller, which doesn't seem likely, I don't see where the installer would fail.
And you could also now set up the wireless card from the...
but you'd have to know how to do that, and I understand that that's not just going to work.
Yeah. Okay, so he concludes, or the end of his email is, but if FreeBSD had supported the machine, I would have only used it long enough to wait for Stefan Sperling on OpenBSD to finish the wireless driver or whatever was lacking. This is something maybe also to keep in mind. People have their preferences. Some prefer OpenBSD, some FreeBSD, some GNU and Linux. We can help people when they ask what can we convert preferences. I talk about what I like in OpenBSD, but it doesn't register with my friends much because different aspects of what an OS should rise to the top in importance for them. When he tries it, it doesn't suit him, and he tells me how foolish I am and points me to some Phoronix benchmark that looks like it ran a fast file system without soft updates. Oh well.
Yes, if people prefer something, that's fine. It just comes down to, if people are having problems trying to use FreeBSD, we'd like to look into that and solve it. But without any detail, it's very hard. And that can be the biggest problem, is that when somebody's very new and never used a BSD before, they don't always know how to read even the error messages they are getting to get or to gather the bits of information we need in order to figure out what went wrong.
Yeah, maybe you should do a 2-person install-a-thon. So you sit together next to each other and then explain yourself.
Yes, I've said for a while I'd love to get together a bunch of new people in a room and stand over their shoulder as they do the install. Although apparently this makes people very nervous.
But this would be a good feedback to see what they're struggling with.
When I was teaching a student, they were like, I type a lot slower when you're watching. I'm like, I don't know why that would be, but apparently. But yes, I would really like to watch people do the FreeBSD install to try to figure out where the improvements need to be made.
Yeah, I see there's a lot in my students. They kind of expect that Bash is the default shell, which is getting problematic in the BSDs, and especially in shell scripting. But that's a whole different issue.
Other than the array iteration, it's not. But yeah.
Yeah. So, or try going to an event where there's a BSD showing of some kind, and figure out, ask questions there, and talk to the people that are there. So maybe they can help you. All right. Thanks for sending that feedback in. Anyway. So the next one is JLR about boot environments broken ? He writes, I've installed FreeBSD 11.1 with all updates and ZFS on root, all set to defaults from the installer. He installed the BEADM via package and patched the no auto bug via the FreeBSD Bugzilla entries. What kind of bug is that?
The older version of BEADM doesn't set the no auto flag on the boot environments, and then two of them mount over top of each other, and it makes it not work.
Okay. All right. So he created a new boot environment with BEADM create-e default upgrade. This returns success, and BEADM list and ZFS list-o, name, mount point, can mount, all show good settings. At least they match what the Bugzilla comments list as good. It
would have been helpful to include that output in the email for us, but continuing.
Yeah. So then he rebooted the box, the ThinkPad 25s, and but apparently
it actually involves powering off because of the ThinkPad problem.
Yeah,
but anyway.
Okay. So he went into the boot environments menu and he sees the default one for active and the zroot/root/default for ZF as boot FS. He also sees two boot environments listed, default and upgrade. So here we go. He selected upgrade, and boot hangs are pretty much at the end of the boot sequence, about where he expect to see a login prompt show up.
Yeah, that suggests that the can mount is not set up properly, and that the inactive boot environment is being mounted over top of root after the original one was mounted, and then /dev goes away, and then you can't access the dev, TTY, etc. So you don't get the login screen. So it's possible your can mount settings are not correct.
Okay. Yeah, then he rebooted and switched the active to ZFS boot FS, both to default, and it boots fine. And then he activated the upgrade one. That was activated fine. And after he rebooted again, and now he has nothing in active and upgrade. Yeah, this looks like the issue that you described.
Yeah. Once you've activated it, it should set it as the bootfs. If you do zpool get bootfs and then the pool name, that's the one that's active. If that's not showing up right in the bootloader, I'd be interested in looking at it, but I don't know.
Yeah, so what's the status on the new boot environment thing that we're doing for the base system?
Which new one for what base system? The tool. GZOG tool. Not finished yet. I don't know when I'll get time to work on that, though. Soon, I hope.
Yeah, we need another conference for you to
well, no, what I need is a week without other stuff to do.
Oh, okay, that's more difficult. Okay, but at least we try to solve your question with this answer that we provided.
Yeah, so I think the ZFS list -o output and zpool get all output from your pool will let me look and see exactly what might be going wrong. Also, I don't know where this ZFS bootfs thing you're seeing is. Or setting. I don't know where you're finding that or what that is.
I'll send us a follow-up with some maybe screenshots or some listings from your outputs that will help us solve the issue, or at least recreate it in our environments. All right. Next one is...
but I guess his final question, if you do end up stuck, one way to get around it is boot off of a USB stick that has the FreeBSD installer and drop into the shell. Zpool import $R/MNT in the pool name. That'll mount the everything and put it in /MNT so it doesn't mount over top root on the USB stick. And then just do zpool set bootfs equals the boot environment you want and then the pool name. And then when you reboot, it'll boot the right one. But again, you have to make sure that all boot environments have can mount equals no auto. Otherwise, it won't work.
I should check my own boot environments now that we mentioned that. Okay. The next one is a ZFS question and suggestions. So Kev writes, "Hi guys, two things. Firstly, the obligatory ZFS question. I have a single disk mini PC which runs bind, DHCPD, and Ansible for his home network. Of course, this isn't fault tolerant in any way, but a weekly backup is sufficient for him. But an extra level of fault tolerance on a single disk system, it seems perfectly sensible to set copies equals 2 on his dataset so that he can catch errors early on a slowly failing disk. Will setting this duplicate blocks that have already been written?
No. When you change a setting, it only applies to every write that happens after that. Yes, you could ZFS send the data back to yourself, or lots of other different ways to rewrite the data. But that's
so that you have
what
all
you'd have
blocks
to do to cause the duplication to happen.
Okay. Yeah. So his suggestion is, if I can make one for a future episode, how about a show featuring women of BSD, as it seems like a boys-only club? I don't want to sound like I'm Singlish or I'm singling out BSD, because I'm guessing this is true for tech in general. Anyway, I love NetBSD and the show. It's good to have a show for the lesser-known Linux distros. Ha ha ha.
Okay.
Yeah, we should do this.
We've interviewed most of the women in BSD already, but we can continue to do so.
Yeah, maybe we can get an update or an interview with Deb Goodkin or some other BSD women.
Has Deb not done an interview yet?
I think not. At least not recently. Otherwise, I would remember.
Well, that's her fault. We'll have to chase her down.
Yeah, this is definitely a good suggestion.
We've done Petra and Drew.
Oh yeah, Drew was there.
And we've done 2 of the ladies that were doing GSOC over the years.
Yeah. But who else?
We've done Diane from Ottawa.
Oh yeah, right.
Or did we? I think we did. I'm quite sure we did. Anyway.
Well, we should get some more. That's definitely a good suggestion.
Exactly.
Cool.
We'll try.
Thanks for that.
We can't get any. As you might have noticed for the last couple of weeks, we haven't got any interviews, but we're working.
Yeah, we should up our games. These are some of the good things we should do for next year.
Yes, it's just,
get more interviews.
As if we have any free time, right?
Yeah, but we'll try to be better in this.
Yep.
And our last question for this week and the year is FreeBSD read cache for ZFS. Oh, Alan is already getting his ZFS knowledge warm here. So Ivan even writes, hello, Alan and Benedict. I was reading FreeBSD Mastery ZFS. Oh, great. And in the using log devices section, there's a following sentence. Mirroring read cache doesn't make much sense.
I think, I don't want to throw him under the bus, but I think Michael might have written that. In general, it doesn't necessarily make sense, although I have since heard of cases where it does make sense.
Yeah, this is maybe probably a general suggestion rather a specific one for a specific use case.
Right. Anyway,
yeah, so he writes, that seemed a bit non-intuitive for him, so he was thinking who better to ask than resident BSD experts, from whom one is the co-author of the above-mentioned book. He can surely understand that for redundancy's sake, it most certainly does not make sense to mirror the read cache, but what about performance? Would a system benefit from having 2 separate NVMe drives as a read cache versus just one? Is eventually performance gain in such cases?
Well, it depends. Wouldn't you gain more from using the 2 separate drives for twice as much cache instead of faster half as much cache? It depends on your working set whether it makes sense. But in general, it's just mirroring it for redundancy doesn't make sense because it's only a cache. It's just a copy of the data, so you can easily recreate it and not a big deal. But yes, sometimes mirroring is required to get the throughput levels you want. Especially pre-NVMe, when all you had is SSDs and they were only so fast, and you could only do so many IOPS. If you had a small enough data set, or a small enough working set, that memory plus your L2 ARC meant 100% coverage, then mirroring it to get more speed was an option. But if all your RAM and all your L2 ARC is not enough to cover all of the data you're working with constantly, then more L2 ARC might be more useful. But remember, more L2 ARC takes up more RAM, meaning less ARC.
Yeah.
Right. So the bigger your L2 ARC is, the less of the very fastest cache in RAM you're actually getting. So having just huge L2 arcs isn't necessarily the best thing either. It really depends on your working set, what actual data you're needing in RAM all the time.
Yeah, this is already a high performance setup that we have in this case.
Yeah, and it depends on your NVMe. You know, if your NVMe does 200,000 IOPS and 4 gigabytes a second, if you're not using that, then maybe mirroring it is in fact a waste of a full NVMe device. But if you're actually maxing out the NVMe devices, then sure, I suppose mirroring it might make sense. But at the same time, NVMe is expensive and you're wearing out 2 of them instead of 1 of them. So maybe it doesn't make sense. It really depends on your workload.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for writing this question, and people can make their own assumptions what they should.
The biggest thing that helped here, I think, was the compressed arc. While the L2 arc already stays compressed and already has this advantage, being able to compress stuff in the arc, especially when you have databases where you're going to get somewhere between 4x and 16x compression, means you can fit a lot more in memory and don't necessarily need to go to the L2 arc as often.
Yep. That is where the whole ZFS pyramid of performance will come together. All right. I think that's it then. But before we let you go, we should still remind you that there are call for papers open for Asia BSDCon and BSDCan until the year goes out. So submit something before you miss the deadline.
Definitely. I think the BSDCan you have until mid-January or so, but Asia BSDCon you only have until January 31st. Or sorry, December 31st to submit your extended abstract. And then you have to have the final paper to them by January 31st if it gets accepted. But in particular, get your proposal for Tokyo in by, what is that, Sunday this week. BSDCan, you have an extra week or so, or 2. But get those proposals in. We would love to see more new speakers and more first-time speakers and just more users as speakers and so on.
Yeah, or do a tutorial. It's also a valuable way to get to Asia.
You know, somebody's got to do a tutorial more popular than Benedict's in Tokyo.
That's even possible.
Holds the record, and that
I can watch. I want to see good tutorials. I don't want to listen to myself talking about cool stuff that I found. So, yeah, submit something and hopefully we'll see you there. And we also hope that you had a nice year with us and here at BSD Now. From the whole BSD Now team, have a good year end. All the best wishes for 2018, and we hope to see you and you hear from us as well in 2018 as well.